Mercury has reached its farthest distance from the Sun, a point astrologers call Ilion. When this happens, clarity doesn't just fade. It dissolves. Your thinking no longer travels in straight lines. It loops. It distorts. It gathers static from everything you haven't fully healed yet. And suddenly, what you thought was intuition could be fear. What you thought was divine timing might be desire wearing prophecy like a mask. Today, your thoughts are not stable. They are floating through unfamiliar air, untethered from light. You may feel inspired, but beneath that inspiration, there's fog. You may feel conviction, but if you look closely, it might be dressed in longing. You are not losing your mind. But your mind is no longer in sync with your center. And that gap is where confusion multiplies. Isaiah 55 verse 8 warned us, "My thoughts are not your thoughts." And today, even your own thoughts are not your own. They sound right. They feel urgent. But they are shaped by distance. This is not a day for quick interpretation. This is not a day to act on every insight. Because when the mind drifts too far from the light, it doesn't go quiet. It starts echoing anything loud enough to fill the gap. And the loudest voice is rarely the truest one. So be careful. What you believe today might sound divine. But if you don't slow down, if you don't filter it, you may end up obeying a voice that was never sent for you. You knew what you wanted to say. It was right there, on the tip of your tongue, in the space between breaths. But somehow, it slipped. Not because it wasn't true, but because it arrived at the wrong time. Or maybe the time was right and you were just slightly off. You looked for the words, and they disappeared. You walked into a room, and forgot why. You stared at your screen, and the sentence unraveled. And later, always later, it comes rushing back. Fully formed. Crystal clear. Too late to use, too heavy to carry. This is what it feels like when the timing of thought becomes fractured. It's not that you're scattered. You're not forgetful. You're not broken. Your mind is simply no longer anchored to the moment your body is in. Thought is drifting. Response is lagging. And the space between what you feel and what you're able to say stretches wider with every hour. You're living in delay, and the delay is subtle enough that you almost convince yourself it's nothing. Almost. You're thinking faster than you're speaking, or slower than you're hearing. And in that blur, the mind stumbles. You reply to the wrong part of the sentence. You laugh a second too late. You say something brilliant, but in the wrong tone, or to the wrong person, or not at all. Your inner clarity isn't gone, it's just moving at a different frequency than the world around you. And when Mercury drifts to Ilion, this is what happens. Cognition begins to float. The normal circuitry that connects thought to body, body to voice, voice to meaning, it begins to stretch. You feel it most in conversation. The words feel like they're arriving behind schedule. You try to catch up. You try to track what the other person is saying, but half your energy is still untangling your last thought. You're listening, but your mind is looping something they said 5 seconds ago. You're present, but not synced. And this delay becomes emotional. Because people think you're distracted. They don't hear the depth in what you almost said. They respond to your timing, not your truth. And you feel misunderstood, not in the dramatic sense, but in the slow, quiet ache of knowing that what you meant didn't land. Not because it was wrong, but because it didn't arrive when it needed to. So you start to hold your tongue more. You begin filtering before you speak. You wait for the right words, but they take too long. And the moment moves on. Someone changes the subject. And the thing you were about to say becomes a secret. Stored. Unspoken. It lives in you, unreleased. This is not hesitation. It's not fear. It's what happens when spiritual timing overrides intellectual reflex. There are moments when your mind stops running on logic and starts running on something deeper. Something slower. Something that refuses to perform on cue. And this is one of those moments. You are not being punished. You're being restructured. The nervous system is adjusting. The signal path is rewiring itself. And until that rewire completes, thought will feel misaligned with action. This is why you may find yourself pausing mid-sentence, forgetting your train of thought, misreading text messages, misjudging someone's silence. You're not overreacting. You're just in a moment where the brain no longer operates on reaction, it's learning to operate on resonance. You can feel the thoughts moving. But they aren't shaped yet. They're clouded. Soft. Interfered with. Not silent, just uncertain. You have to sit with them longer now. Let them form at their own pace. This is not a test of intelligence. It's a test of rhythm. Can you move at the speed of alignment instead of the speed of expectation? Because the expectation is always speed. Say something. Say it now. Be clear. Be sharp. Be ready. But Mercury at Elion says no. Not now. Not like that. The signal is not coming from the usual place. It's arriving through delay, through reflection, through spiritual fragmentation that doesn't want to be pieced back together too quickly. Some insights are meant to be late. Some truths only ripen in hindsight. And if you keep trying to force thoughts to show up on time, you'll miss what they were meant to become. You'll interrupt them before they mature. You'll cut off revelation because it didn't arrive fast enough to prove its worth. And this is where frustration creeps in. Not because you don't know, but because you don't know fast enough. You question your capacity. You wonder if you're off. You feel like you're behind, when in reality you're being pulled forward, but through a slower portal. Through a longer path. This is not dysfunction. It's divine timing dislocating you from the world's rhythm so you can remember your own. When thought no longer lands at the speed of conversation, it begins to echo instead. You hear old thoughts return. You remember things you didn't choose to recall. You say things you didn't plan to say. And even then, the meaning arrives after the sound. You understand yourself only once the words are already in the air. But what if that's not a flaw? What if this drift is meant to slow you down long enough to notice what usually gets bypassed? What if this delay is how the spirit stretches you into reflection? What if every fractured thought is a doorway, not an error? There's a deeper knowing forming here. A kind that doesn't speak first. A kind that waits, listens, turns the thought over 4 or 5 times before assigning it a name. This knowing doesn't race to conclusions. It lets the words bloom slowly. In layers. Through image. Through silence. Through the body. And the body knows. Even when the mind is scattered, the body remembers the frequency of truth. You may not find the perfect sentence, but you'll feel the resonance when it's right. You may not respond on time, but when you do respond, it will be clean. Undeniable. Whole. This is what it means to speak from alignment instead of reaction. But first, you must survive the fracture. The silence between thoughts. The time delay that makes you feel emotionally late to your own life. You have to stop interpreting the pause as failure. You have to stop apologizing for the way your voice trails off, the way your thoughts return in the middle of the night instead of in the middle of the meeting. This is how it's supposed to be right now. Because revelation doesn't always arrive on time. Sometimes, it arrives in pieces. And the space between each piece teaches you how to wait. How to hold. How to trust what doesn't finish itself right away. So let the thought be incomplete. Let the word slip away before it forms. Let the idea return in a different tone than when it first appeared. You are not falling behind. You are learning how to process life without forcing clarity. And yes, it's hard. The world demands fast thinking, fast words, fast conclusions. But spiritual accuracy has its own tempo. And when Mercury is this far out, that tempo slows. Your mind can't keep pace with performance anymore. It can only echo what's real. And sometimes, the truth echoes long before it speaks. You still feel things. That hasn't changed. You still wake up with a strange pressure in your chest, walk into a room and pick up on something that wasn't spoken, sense the energy of someone before they even look at you. You still get gut feelings, sudden knowing, emotional shifts that don't come from anything obvious. But now, those feelings don't hold steady. They arrive fast, sharp, urgent, but then fade just as quickly, like mist hitting the surface of a mirror. You're left unsure whether what you felt was real or just a brief flicker of internal static. Something has shifted, not in your gift, but in the clarity of its signal. The intuition is still there. But it doesn't feel like truth anymore. It feels like possibility mixed with projection. You think you know what someone is feeling, but a second later, you doubt it. You feel drawn toward a certain decision, but then realize it may have been your fear speaking first. You pick up on signs, repeating numbers, dreams, synchronicities, and part of you wants to call it divine guidance, but another part whispers that it could just be your own longing bouncing off the walls of your perception. This is the moment when intuition becomes unstable, and what you call insight begins to carry the taste of something else. It's not deception in the traditional sense. It's not lies. It's overlay. Your intuitive channel is being crossed with unresolved emotion, unspoken need, subconscious worry. You're still sensing, but you're not sure if what you're sensing is clean. And the more sensitive you are, the harder it is to tell where your own spirit ends and someone else's shadow begins. Mercury's drift from the sun has stretched your cognitive connection. Thought is no longer anchored. And so, the heart tries to lead, but the heart is a dangerous compass when it's full of echoes. You feel something stir inside you and assume it's insight, because it usually is. But right now, everything inside you is also stirred. You're not just receiving messages, you're leaking, absorbing, reflecting. And when that happens, discernment becomes a slow process of untangling what came from where. You tell yourself you're receiving divine direction, but is it direction, or an emotional reaction dressed in sacred language? You hear a voice inside you and trust it, but has that voice been colored by something you didn't realize you were still holding on to? You sense someone's shift in energy and assume it's about you, but is it really, or are you replaying an old abandonment wound that never found closure? Your gift is not broken. But it's overloaded. Right now, your intuitive system is too porous. And porous doesn't mean impure, it means unfiltered. You're not receiving false messages, you're just receiving too much, too fast, with not enough grounding to discern. The emotional signal, the spiritual signal, the physical tension, the mental fog, it's all coming through the same channel. And you're trying to decode it before it settles. That's where the distortion creeps in. Not because the input is wrong, but because the interpreter is tired. You're not supposed to act on every sensation. You're not supposed to name every shift. You're not supposed to assign meaning to every feeling that passes through your body. Not right now. Because when intuition is tinged with projection, what you think is confirmation might actually be compensation. The universe isn't necessarily answering you, it might be that your nervous system is looking for a shape to give its unrest. And you've learned to spiritualize everything. That's part of your sensitivity. But now, the same gift that helped you survive is being refined. You are being asked not to see more, but to filter more. To wait before speaking what you sense. To hold the feeling without instantly declaring it as truth. To sense the pattern without assuming it's prophecy. To admit that sometimes, what feels like insight is just your own vulnerability showing up with symbols you already understand. That's what makes this season so tricky. The messages still come. The dreams are still vivid. The signs are still showing up. But you feel less sure about what they're saying. You used to feel anchored in your knowing. Now, your knowing wavers. You interpret a feeling one way, and an hour later, it shifts. You act on what felt sacred, only to realize it wasn't settled yet. You speak a truth, and then wonder if it was shaped by your own fear. This is not failure. This is exposure. You're being shown the thin layer between spiritual reception and emotional interference. You're being asked to sit inside that tension long enough to learn the difference. And that requires restraint. It requires stillness. It requires the kind of inner maturity that no longer needs to label everything as a message just to feel safe. What you're being trained for now isn't sharper intuition. It's cleaner intuition. Not louder. Truer. Less reactive. More resonant. The kind that knows when to wait. When to let a flicker pass before chasing it. When to say, maybe that wasn't for me. When to feel something and choose not to define it immediately. Because clarity that lasts rarely arrives on the first wave. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. Prepared to carry insight without attaching ego. To receive spiritual direction without trying to bend it to your desires. To be in conversation with God, with Spirit, with the invisible field, and know that sometimes, that conversation includes silence. Delay. Recalibration. You are not always meant to understand in real time. And right now, the real-time signal is compromised. Not because the divine has withdrawn, but because Mercury's drift has opened space between what you know and how you hear. And in that space, old wounds echo louder. You want so badly to trust what you sense, but sensing and knowing aren't the same. Not now. So what do? You pause. You notice the feeling, but don't react. You receive the image in your dream, but you don't build a theology around it the next morning. You hear the whisper, but you let it echo once, twice, 3 times before assigning it weight. You don't abandon your gift, you deepen its discipline. You let your intuition go quiet long enough to be purified. You wait. You listen again. And you don't name it yet. That's the difference now. You're not being asked to speak what you feel before it settles. You're being asked to let it swirl, hold it gently, and notice if it stays or fades. If it fades, you let it go. If it stays, you wait again. Because the insight that survives silence, that's the one that carries truth. This moment doesn't need a prophecy. It needs a filter. And the filter is your patience. Something enters your mind, a phrase, a picture, a possibility. It arrives like a spark, sudden and charged. And before you've even breathed it in, you're already reaching to act on it. A message comes to you in a dream, and the moment you wake, you assume it's meant to be done. A word drops into your chest during a conversation, and without waiting for confirmation, you reshape the whole moment around it. A strong feeling arises mid-thought, and instead of asking why, it becomes your reason. But not everything you receive is meant to be followed. In this atmosphere, thought itself becomes too loud. You hear your own voice in your head, but it echoes strangely, like someone turned up the volume without adjusting the signal. This is the effect of Mercury pulling far from the sun. What should be a whisper becomes a drumbeat. And you don't just hear your thoughts, you feel ordered by them. Urged. Pressured. You mistake the question for a command. The potential becomes a mandate. The flicker becomes a mission. But what if the flash wasn't meant to be acted on? What if it was meant to be questioned? This is the kind of moment where internal dialogue grows too sharp. Not because you've lost control, but because space itself has been distorted. Thought moves without anchor. Feeling follows thought. And action? It comes too fast. Not because you don't know better, but because the environment is charged. You're responding to a reflection, not a route. To a wave, not a direction. And the instinct to obey every inner signal is no longer wisdom, it's impulsivity dressed up as discernment. There's a reason James 1 verse 19 reminds us, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Because speed of thought is not always a sign of truth. Sometimes, it's just momentum. And Mercury at Ilion creates momentum without grounding. The mind keeps running past the point of insight, and instead of letting the idea land, you launch with it. You run with a word that wasn't yours. You execute a vision before it was clarified. You take a passing thought and make it a full instruction, without waiting to see if it holds. This is how you start to mistake questions for commands. It's subtle. You don't hear a booming voice say, "Go." You just feel like you must. Like it would be dangerous to pause. Like you'll miss your moment if you wait. But that pressure, that's not confirmation. That's the echo chamber. Thought, without balance. Insight, without patience. You're responding to your own urgency. And urgency is rarely prophetic. Some of what's rising in you is good. But not ready. Some of what you're sensing is real. But not now. And some of what you think is divine. It's just the amplification of your inner voice in a season when silence has pulled too far to offer contrast. When the soul lacks contrast, it overcommits to whatever speaks next. That's the danger here, not that you don't hear, but that you obey too soon. You obey without testing. You obey without anchoring. You obey without knowing whether the thing that spoke was a whisper from heaven, or an echo of fear passing through a hollow hallway. And the hallway? It sounds sacred when it's empty. You need to hear this: not every insight is an instruction. Some ideas come to be held, not acted on. Some thoughts are questions from your soul, not orders from your spirit. Some messages were meant to rest in silence for days, even weeks, before you ever speak them. But the atmosphere right now tricks you into believing otherwise. It makes stillness feel like disobedience. It makes patience feel like avoidance. And it makes the echo of your own thinking feel like a timeline that must be fulfilled immediately. But questions are not commands. They are invitations. Spaces. Spaces to test the tone. To wait for weight. To discern whether what you received has endurance, or whether it only lives in the urgency of your current need. Most people never pause long enough to find out. But you're being asked to wait. To hold what you hear without running with it. To feel the difference between revelation and suggestion. To be still enough to notice that just because something lands doesn't mean it was sent. This is part of spiritual maturity. The ability to sit with the maybe, that not yet, the hold this for a while. The ability to carry a vision and not act. To know something, and not speak. To sense direction, and not move. Why? Because some of the most accurate intuitions are given in advance, not for immediate obedience, but for eventual alignment. You were never meant to treat every moment of awareness as a deadline. You were meant to discern timing as deeply as you discern message. This isn't about hesitation. It's about trust. The kind of trust that says, if this is real, it will return. If this is divine, it won't die in waiting. If this is mine, I don't have to rush to claim it. But in this energetic climate, trust is hard. Because space itself is swollen. Everything you hear feels urgent. Every vision feels now. Every impression feels like a call. The emotional current beneath your thoughts is rapid, and you start mistaking the pull of inner motion for outer command. You begin to believe that insight demands immediate response. That intuition must be verified through action. That clarity equals speed. But clarity without wisdom leads to wasted movement. You are not being tested on how fast you can respond. You are being tested on how long you can hold the question without turning it into an instruction. And yes, this is uncomfortable. Especially if you're someone who's always trusted your inner signal. Especially if your gift has led you to act quickly in the past, and it worked. But this isn't that season. This is a new space. A space where your thoughts are echoing louder than usual. A space where even accurate downloads carry distortion around the edges. A space where your own desire to be obedient might cause you to obey something that wasn't from God at all. What you receive today needs testing. Not suspicion. Not doubt. Testing. Space. A breath. An extra heartbeat between the knowing and the doing. Enough pause for the truth to either deepen or dissolve. Some of what you hear will survive that pause. It will grow. Clarify. Expand. Confirm itself. And when it does, you'll know it was meant to move. But some of what you hear will not survive the pause. It will thin out. Reveal its origin. It will fade before it ever becomes whole. That's how you'll know it was just a question. And questions are holy. They're how the divine speaks before clarity arrives. They're how your own spirit stretches its legs. They're how revelation begins, not with answers, but with the willingness to sit in what hasn't taken shape yet. You've mistaken questions for commands before. We all have. But this is the season where that pattern starts to break. You are learning how to wait without weakness. How to receive without responding. How to trust that God doesn't need you to act immediately for the message to stay true. And yes, if you can stop reacting to every echo, something quieter will emerge. Something beneath the noise. Something slower. Something sacred. But only if you stop long enough to hear it. This isn't confusion. It's recalibration. When Mercury drifts this far from the Sun, your thoughts no longer arrive as clean directives, they reflect, echo, distort. The mind stops commanding. It begins mirroring. What rises today may not be wrong, but it's not final either. You are not here to obey every idea. You are here to observe which ones belong. Today isn't about control. It's about containment. You don't have to follow every flicker of insight. You just have to stay present long enough to recognize what's been trying to speak beneath the noise. Let the mind circle. Let the thoughts pass through. Don't fear them, discern them. Take every thought captive, 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5. Not so you can silence them, but so you can sort them. Because some thoughts aren't instructions. They're invitations to sit still. And in the stillness, clarity arrives. Not as a voice, but as peace. If this message met you in the fog and helped you pause, let me know in the comments. I'm not chasing, I'm watching. And if you'd like more moments like this, don't forget to subscribe and stay connected. Your stillness is sacred. Your attention is a gate. Keep listening.